The Witcher's debut on Netflix at the end of 2019 was a somewhat surprising hit, considering the middling reviews from critics and the complexity of the material. But it was also the proof producers had been looking for that, despite how Game of Thrones ended, that the fantasy genre was alive and well. Netflix is now doubling down on that bet with a second high fantasy concept series, Cursed. Based on the illustrated novel of the same name by Thomas Wheeler and Frank Miller, this reimagining of the storied Arthurian legend can seem at times to be aimed at a younger crowd. But there's enough buried in here that even the nerdiest medievalist will likely find something to enjoy. The King Arthur myth dates back to the 5th century, with folklore tales of a great king who led Britain against the Saxon invasions of the period. Over time, the stories became more about Christianity's takeover of the Anglo-Saxon people, a righteous victory over pagans and magical witchcraft. This shift in the retelling is most obviously symbolized by the story of the Holy Grail, a direct relic of the Last Supper, which King Arthur's knights famously attempted to recover after he became king. But the King Arthur myths are also decidedly masculine, written by white men in a time of deep patriarchal retrenchment in Western civilization. The cursed conceit is to flip all that on its head. It turns the story into one where instead of choosing a king, the great sword of power, the one from the stone, has chosen a queen instead, fighting against the rise of Christianity in defense of the magical peoples and creatures of the forests, known collectively as the Fae people. The woman the sword chooses is Nimue, best known in mythology as the Lady of the Lake. But Cursed, for all its teen angst, is a surprisingly delightful show that expertly plays with Arthurian lore in a way that feels knowledgeable, as well as creative. The Lady of the Lake is a mythical figure in her own right, an enchantress of great power. But modern retellings, especially films like Excalibur, have reduced her to an angelic image floating in water, presenting the sword to the worthy Arthur. Perhaps most recently, a version of her turned up in the ABC series, Once Upon a Time, but most know her from the Monty Python joke that argues strange women lying in ponds distributing swords should not be the basis for systems of governance. Nimue's story ages her down a little bit, but by the time she takes up her magical weapon, there's no doubt that it is she, and not Arthur, who should be leading the charge. Unlike The Witcher, which brought in a list actor Henry Cavill, known primarily for his big screen work, Cursed casts a little closer to home. Nimue is played by Katherine Langford, known best for her turn as Hannah, the character who dies by suicide at the beginning of the 13 Reasons Why franchise and yet somehow still stars in it for 2 full seasons.